Hello. Beep boop. This video will be on the magic of geekery, or nerdery, or whatever you want to call it. They used to be negative terms. They used to be, well, it was a different time. I came up with about 4 different really heavy political important things that I wanted to say, but I'm not quite ready to delve into, despite the fact that the purpose of this channel is for me to fight Batman, which is my own internal issues that I built up from living in basically a dystopian police state, to deal with all of those. And several of the things that I've learned and chosen to do while dealing with all of those are related to political stuff, because that's how you change problems, is by using diplomacy and politics and all that sort of stuff. But instead, we're going to talk about the magic of nerdery, and I'll come back to those. I'll circle around, because yes, eventually I will be talking about things that are politically charged, because this is my channel and I can talk about what I want. And a lot of those things are heavily informed by facts or by my opinions, which again, I'm allowed to talk about on my channel. The really cool thing about nerdery now, being, by the way, I'm going to define it. The thing that makes you a nerd now is liking something enough to where you're not ashamed of liking it. If you geek out in private, it's a little less nerdy. But if you are so into it that you're willing to wear shirts or have keychains or talk to strangers who are also wearing those things, then that, or go to conventions for it, that's where I draw the line. That's where I say, from there up, you're a nerd. And there's lots of really, really interesting fandoms out there worthy of nerding out about. Comic books, movies, video games, specific radio shows, podcasts. Some of these things are really, really old and have long established followings, like Whovians and Star Trek nerds and, well, Trekkies, and, Star Wars nerds, and, there's numerous nerds of those things. I was a nerd, and I did get beat up for it, because that used to be the standard thing. It used to be that jocks, which were the people who played sports, didn't do any of the nerdy stuff. So we would play video games, and they would beat us up for it. We would play card games, and they would beat us up for it. We would really, really like Star Wars, and they would beat us up for it, because all they really liked were sports. And it's weird, because sports is kind of a nerdery in and of itself. If you can name a ton of players of your favorite sport, then you're probably a sports nerd. And if you pit those players in imaginary combat against each other through fantasy football, fantasy, soccer, fantasy, whatever, then you're definitely a sports nerd. But those nerderies are, it's weird that they're the same, but one of them is allowed and accepted and the other one is not. Hey wife, I'm doing a video. Do you need me to stop? Yeah. Cool. But one of the really, really cool things about being a nerd is that you can really, really enjoy things in a way that allows you to drag other people into it. And you can be super duper involved in this fandom, and it gives you something in common, so you immediately have something to talk about. Because a lot of times when you meet new people, you don't have anything to say. So you talk about silly things like the weather or other things that you can't do anything about, like politics. So the great thing about nerdery is you automatically have some topics to talk about, and you automatically have some things in common. And even if you completely disagree with that person about how to appreciate it, it still is a bond for a lot of people. My wife is obsessed with Pokemon. She's obsessed with several other... Oh, yeah, that's a good point. One of the things that saved me from being kind of a helpless nerd was that I was a nerd about so many different things. And so, yes, I was super into Star Trek. I was super into Star Wars. I was super into magic. I was super into video games. I was super into so many different things that it was really hard to nail down that I was a nerd. And so I was allowed to be friends with popular people. And really, back in the day, that was a huge deal. That I was nerdy in so many ways that I was not just a nerd. My wife, as I was saying, is obsessed with Pokemon and dinosaurs and some video games. And what else, woman? Oh, Harry Potter. So, when I wanted to, and this is where this becomes a story time. When I wanted to propose to my wife, there was some trouble at first, but we'll leave that to the side because grr bark. But when I finally got to do it, which was the second time I was trying to, we were both working at school. We were it was our first teaching job. I was working at the high school teaching English, and she was working at the middle school teaching art. And what I did was I had a special Pokemon themed ring. As I said, my wife was obsessed with Pokemon. I actually wasn't that into Pokemon when we got together. I learned a bunch of stuff so that I could have things to talk about with her. And so I put the word out to my students a week beforehand that I was going to be proposing to my wife and I could use some student help. And these were small schools, but dozens, if not 100 people showed up. It was a lot of people. And my wife worked at the middle school. The middle school was next door to the high school, so we tromped over there. We had the help of my wife's best friend, who I'm not sure I want to out her. I can just use her first name. That's legal, right? She won't mind. My wife's best friend, Cindy. And Cindy was the art teacher for the high school. So she was with me, and she was on board. So what I did was I had my students plan to trap my wife in a room. I know this sounds creepy. Every romantic gesture sounds creepy from the outside. But I had Cindy go in first, and she was going to talk like a Pokemon. So she was just going to say her name over and over again. My wife was completely onto this trick. And so Cindy walked in and started Cindying at my wife. And my wife was literally just, "Oh, you're talking like a Pokemon." And Cindy was like, "Yep." Well, Cindy. And so my wife just kept talking as if this were not odd, because that's my wife. But then my students started tromping in. High school students are much larger than middle school students, and the room seemed very small with all these high school students piling in. I had gotten the football players to block the doors. So basically my wife was trapped 2 or 3 deep in this room. And the kids were also told they were only allowed to say their names as students. So they were not allowed to say no or yes or hi or anything. So most of these kids did not know my wife. My wife didn't know them. So suddenly this room was filled with older students who are not usually at the middle school. And my wife starts mildly freaking out, but at the same time is game because I've done weird things before. So I basically I lean in and I say, and my wife is like, "Okay, what the hell's going on?" I lean in and I say to Cindy, "Hey Cindy, you shove." So Cindy shoves my wife, and my wife immediately goes, "What the hell? Come on!" So I had these bouncy Pokeballs that fit into your hand, and I threw it into the room. Not intending to hit my wife, and I didn't, thankfully. And it missed. And I was like, "Did it work?" And all the students said, their name in a sad, negative tone. "Nathan, Cindy." So then I said, "Sandy, you scratch." And she scratched my wife because she's a good friend. And she's like, "No, what the hell?" So then I used a slightly more powerful Pokeball. They have higher catch rates depending on their color. I'm sure you guys know that because of the Pokemon Go craze, or because you played Pokemon. That didn't work. So finally, I went in, and everyone who's watched the TV show knows that you turn around your hat backwards. I was wearing a suit and turned around my hat backwards. And I had a Master Ball, which is the ball that has 100% capture rate. And in it, I had a Pokemon-themed engagement ring. And so I came in with that and did the kneeling down thing. And my wife, of course, because she's amazing and also my wife, snatched it right out of my hand and put it on the wrong finger, on the wrong hand. And we were engaged. And everybody was cheering, and there were videos taken. They're probably out there somewhere in the ether. I'll see if I can find one. I doubt it at this point. It's been years and years now. But, yeah, that's how I got my wife. Is I used our Nerdery so that we have together to, let her know that I appreciated her and that she was worth the great deal of effort it took to make that all happen. So, Nerderies are awesome. Also, several of the friends I have made in Sweden have been purely through, hey, you're wearing Legend of Zelda stuff. You want to talk about Legend of Zelda? And yeah, sometimes no, but sometimes yes. And so I've made some friends that way. It's one of the ways most nerds are more open to talking than a normal kind of Swede, because a lot of Swedes are very uncomfortable when you just randomly approach them. But nerds, for some reason, more open to it. Usually you can tell by the garb what kind of nerd they are, and if you can, then you'll know you can talk to them. I have noticed that almost anyone who's wearing Harry Potter garb that is not Gryffindor is completely open to being talked to. Hufflepuff, Slytherin, Ravenclaw, most of those are totally into it. Gryffindor sometimes indicates like somebody who doesn't even really know what Harry Potter is. Their grandma got them something that was cool and nerd related, and they just kind of wore it. So that is today's video, which is about Nerdery and a story time of my engagement. So, thank you very much. Oh, also, just in case you were keeping up, I started the book, and I'm about 50 pages in. I did not initially like it. It took me a couple of chapters, but then I met a character who was just absolutely amazing and incredibly fun, and now I'm totally into it. So, I'm ready for the ride. But, hope you guys have a super great day. I will try to read more later. I only had one trip home on public transport, and it's rude to ride and not talk to another person, so reading in a car, that is nice. Hope you guys are well. Have a great day. Beep boop.